Hi, guys. Welcome to today's interview. Today, we will dive deep into the topic of the tail spend, an area often overlooked in procurement, but one that holds significant potential for strategic growth and cost savings. I'm super excited to introduce our two expert guests, Joaquin Morales, the procurement director with years of experience in optimizing procurement strategies, and Brendan Carroll, vice president of SDI, well known for his innovative approach to the tail spend management. Today, we will be discussing the challenges that businesses face with the tail spend. I will ask them why it matters and how companies can transform this space into a driver for success. Let's dive in. Hoa, question for you. What is tail spend?
So tail spend is often referred as the bottom 20% of the spend in a company that is typically unmanaged or non-managed at all. I think that's a great starting point for a procurement person that is going to start an analysis for their spend of their company. But I think we also need to take into consideration what's the procurement team structure as well, because for companies that have a smaller structure, it could mean that potentially their unmanaged spend is higher than that 20%. And for other type of companies that have a larger procurement team or other buying channels in place, it might be lower. But I think it's a great starting point. From my perspective, you always need to take into consideration your team size and drawing the line, okay, what's the threshold where my procurement team cannot service stakeholders as effectively as they do for the strategic spend.
Why is managing tail spend so important?
I think there are a lot of key aspects on why it's important. The first one is that there's a very large risk by working with suppliers that have not adhered to your company's standard terms and conditions. Stakeholders might be reaching out to a supplier on their own, agreeing to work under their terms and conditions, and that might represent a risk to the company in case there's an issue with the product or the service that that supplier is delivering. The second one is the financial risk. Tail spend could represent the bottom 20% of the company's spend, but it could go up to 40% in some cases. Stakeholders might be agreeing to pay those suppliers in 5, 10, then 15 days, as opposed to the standard 60, 90, or 120. That is a huge financial impact on the company. The other one is that stakeholders might be bypassing the procurement process and paying these suppliers using an invoice only process or a P card, and no one is really validating who those companies are. They're not going through a due diligence process. So essentially, you might be doing business with a company that might not be well seen out there in the market, and your name as a company might eventually be connected to this company in the future. And it might not be like a legal risk at that point or a financial risk, but the reputation of the company might be affected because you didn't really do a proper due diligence for those tail spend suppliers.
So, how does tail spend impact overall procurement strategy?
That's a great question. What I see in the market is procurement organizations don't necessarily have the bandwidth to manage tail, but they spend an enormous amount of their operational resources fighting the tail. Where their real goals and objectives are in the strategic spend arena, they spend an enormous amount of their time doing administrative tasks trying to manage tail.
What are the most common challenges in managing tail spend?
The first one is probably implementing a tail spend program. There's a lot of resistance from stakeholders because they might have owned a relationship with a supplier for a very long time, and suddenly there's a new process they need to follow and they feel like they are losing that ownership or relationship. The second one is also resistance from procurement itself. A lot of people might think when you implement a tail spend program that their job might be going away, that there's someone coming in to do their job if they decide to implement a master vendor solution or bring a third party to help with that. But the reality is, once they understand the clear objective of a tail spend programs, like the objective is for them to have more time to focus on strategic spend and have someone help them with that tail spend. The lack of visibility is also a challenge because you don't really know how big your tail might be, what kind of support you might need, which are the categories that are bypassing the standard procurement process and somehow getting all these agreements in place with these suppliers. And again, the limitation of having internal resources fully dedicated to a tailspend implementation is also a big challenge because, I mean, it became a bit more popular in the last 4 or 5 years, but it's not very common in a large corporation to have a tailspend expert. And that's when they have to go out to the market and find a partner that can help them with that. So the lack of internal resources might also be a challenge.
So, what are the risks of unmanaged tail spend?
The largest risk is probably the contractual and regulatory risk, not working on standard terms and conditions, not protecting the company effectively. The regulatory risks are real and actually becoming larger as countries' laws to protect small businesses, laws to protect contractors, smaller companies. So that is there. The kind of indirect risk, in my opinion, is your company's brand risk and fraud. Unmanaged spend can have a detrimental effect on the brand of an organization if certain things do not go right. If you are leaving it up to individuals to buy in an uncontrolled manner, things can happen, and things do happen. So, that's where I see kind of the indirect risk of not managing the tail correctly is your organization's brand, your reputation in the market, and the fraud risk is real. If you look at any of the studies, that tends to be where fraud develops or is inherent in that ordering process.
What are common misconceptions about tail spend?
Probably one of the first ones, it's like it's not worth the effort to manage it. We'll have to invest more money than the return it will potentially give us. And they might not be looking at other components we mentioned before, like the potential risk of onboarding a supplier under non-standard terms, the financial impact that this might generate when you have to start paying suppliers in net 5, net 10 days because no one push them to work under your standard payment terms. I think it's a general misconception. Like, yeah, it's stale. It will take so much effort and we will not see a return from that. I mean, might not always be a tangible return like, okay, I achieved 10, 15% cost savings, but there are other things that should be taken into consideration as well. Another one is like, okay, tail spend, it's low value orders. That's maybe a good judgment, but it all depends how large your procurement structure is today. Because you might be having a relatively small team to manage, I don't know, $500 million of annual spend. Your team might not be able to touch anything below 100,000 or a quarter of a million. Like, that's not tail anymore, but it's still unmanaged. So there's a lot of room to implement a solution that will give you a much higher ROI. The last one, tail spend, let's implement a standard solution from the market and it will solve all our issues. There's no one solution fits all. At some point, something will always have to be customized to meet our customers' procurement policies or their reporting formats. So I think those are probably some of the biggest misconceptions that are out there today about tail spend management.
Is there a single solution for the tail spend problem?
Absolutely not. What we see in the industry is a lot of different technologies that are maturing to handle each part of the tail or a certain aspect of it, whether it's sourcing, contracting, operating, or payment. There really is not one solution. You have category solutions that are opportunities. You have different service models that may fit clients differently. You have highly regulated industries that might have limitations on how the right tail approach can be handled. Particularly if you look at the tech and financial sectors, they'll go towards a more limited outsourcing solution or a limited technology solution because data breach, data security is critical. So there really is not one solution fits all.
There are so many tools on the market. Most use artificial intelligence. Why is not enough to invest in a good tool to solve tail spend problems for good?
It is a good idea to invest in technology for the tail, right? And various technologies. Why it's not a singular solution is because the technology and the stakeholders, being suppliers, managers, buyers, all still need to be managed. The technology itself does not and will not drive a completely autonomous result. What's also most important when you think about the technologies in the tail is, well, technologies that are out there will probably increase the tail. I think the tail is going to expand dramatically in the next 5 to 10 years. Because as people use technologies, as they make the buying process easier or more automated, the traditional way of leveraging strategic suppliers is going to decline, and stakeholders are going to have more of a autonomous decision making in what they purchase, whether it's services, goods, or anything to run the business in a company. Therefore, the tail will actually increase. And I actually think that's a good thing. The market's going to react to that. It will streamline and improve on pricing and operations. But all that activity still needs to be managed. And companies don't necessarily have the ability to manage it today. They certainly won't have the ability to manage it when it's various technologies interacting with each other.
That is great. I didn't think about it, but that's true. It will just make the tail problem even bigger for them when they use technology.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Stakeholders can select any supplier out of that list, and you're not really forcing them with a preferred supplier list. If you want to focus purely on savings, that might mean that you might have to do business every single time with a different supplier. So it really depends on what you want to focus on.
Okay, so question for you, Hoa. What tools or technologies can help manage tail spend?
I think some of the existing procurement technologies in general are now more oriented to bringing tail spend management solutions to the table. For example, like a Coupa or an Ariba, that now you have these guided buying experiences for stakeholders, aiming to route stakeholders through the correct channels when they are trying to purchase something. And in the past, following the procurement process meant reach out to procurement at the time you have the need. Today, that might mean go to your eProc tool, go to a guided buy tile, and the system will route you to the appropriate buying channel. So reaching out to procurement at the beginning is probably not the standard thing anymore. Like, technology has started to bring other options and make the process more streamlined for stakeholders, and that's great. I think it also alleviates some of the time that procurement has to dedicate to that stakeholder management. If it's properly communicated, a lot of times they might be able to find their way without even reaching out to a person. In addition to that, I think there are a lot of new supplier management platforms. It's also much easier for suppliers to register to become a potential supplier of a company. They have access to see RFQs and RFPs, and there's a self-onboarding process they can follow. They can agree to the company terms and conditions pretty much on their own. As a company, you don't really have to invest a lot of time and effort to get those suppliers onboarded. And as we were discussing before, there's a lot of AI-driven technology that is helping make the entire process more streamlined. A chatbot, for example, can route a stakeholder to the appropriate buying channel, or help them see how to raise a purchase request in the system, or to check the status of their PR, check if there's an invoice submitted against their PO already. And the same goes for suppliers. They might be asking, what's the status of my invoice? When are you going to pay it? Well, you can just chat with the bot, put your invoice number there, and the system itself will retrieve the expected payment date for you. And that's great. How many of those inquiries can be managed in an automated way without human intervention? Because we, again, are talking about tail here and thousands of transactions. The more you can automate those common questions that you often receive, the more efficient your tail spend management will be. And last to mention is, of course, all the sourcing technologies that have appeared in the market in the last 5 to 7 years. They are bringing a lot of speed to the sourcing process, which is great, particularly for tail. There are a lot of categories like MRO, where probably the stakeholder cannot wait for 5 to 10 days for you to get a quotation from them. But if you have a platform that is reaching out to key suppliers that could potentially deliver that product or service quickly, they will likely give you a quotation in 24 to 48 hours, and you can go ahead and process a requirement for your stakeholder pretty quickly. and in alignment with the company policies, which is really great. I think that today, if they try to bypass the procurement process and come to procurement with a quotation of a new supplier that has not adhered to any of the terms and conditions, it will end up taking even more time than if they went through the appropriate channels. So I think they will start to realize that reaching out to procurement for support, even though these are low value orders, ultimately will allow them to get what they need in a much faster time frame. And that's probably the biggest change in mindset that AI driven technology will bring to Tailspin.
So, are there certain industries or sectors with larger tail span than the others?
From what I see, yes, there are. The industrial manufacturing and essentially any manufacturing tends to have a larger transactional tail. That transactional tail being lower value orders, more suppliers. The larger, the Fortune 500 organizations that are not manufacturing do have very large tails, but their tail looks a lot differently. Their scope tends to be higher. The transactions tend to be lower, and they tend to be in the categories that support the business, like marketing, services, facilities, where manufacturing's tail definitely geared towards the manufacturing environment, the plants, the distribution, the logistics. The tail is different for different industries. I've not seen an industry that does not have a tail. Every industry does have a tail that I've seen or have been privy to the data. I've not seen a single industry that does not have a tail environment, whether it's managed or unmanaged, within their portfolio.
Can Tailspin generate any cost savings?
Totally. We typically think of tail spend as unmanaged spend. And the first thing that probably comes to everyone's mind is, okay, if I start sourcing and negotiating, I will achieve source cost savings here. And that's great. I think with any single process that you decide to implement for tail, as long as you put a team negotiating or sourcing that spend, you will always achieve a certain degree of cost savings. In average, the industry shows that the savings that you can achieve vary from 10 to 20%. In addition to that, depending on how you want to tackle your tail spend issue, if you decide to go for a master vendor solution, for example, you can also take into consideration the operational cost savings. And these operational cost savings come from the delegation of a lot of activities to a third party. So through a master vendor, a company will not have to onboard those suppliers into their systems anymore. If those suppliers have any questions related to the procurement process, they directly go to the third party. If the stakeholders have any questions as well, they can go through the third party to get them answered. Processing of purchase order, validation of supplier invoices. When we're talking about tail, we are talking probably about the bottom 20% more or less, but that equates to a high percentage of the total company transactions. So you might be talking about thousands of purchase orders, thousands of invoices, thousands of queries from stakeholders, from suppliers. It's always delegated to a third party. When you implement a master vendor solution, those operational cost savings could add up to a 2.5% saving as well. So that's a pretty good numbers, I would say. Like you might get up to 2.5% of operational cost savings. You can have maybe, let's say, in average, a 10 to 15% source cost savings. The combination of both are probably going to give you a great ROI for a Tailspin program that you decide to implement that typically varies from 5 to 7x. So yes, there's a lot of opportunity to save money with Tailspin management.
And what about companies that do not feel comfortable with outsourcing their tail and decide to manage it internally? Do you think their procurement team of buyers are able to manage tail spend effectively and generate any significant cost saving from it?
It's a great question, but I think there's another aspect that needs to be taken into consideration because a company might also have to change their procurement processes, their procurement guidelines, because they typically have guidelines and processes that are oriented for big suppliers with whom they will have a long lasting partnership and relationship. And they lack of a way to onboard suppliers in a simplified way when we're talking about tail. So internally, the company might have to do even more stuff in order to be able to implement an internal solution like this. Realistically speaking, from my perspective, it would be best to leverage a partner that has a lot of experience in this and will probably be able to come in, deploy a solution for you. It doesn't need to be the master vendor solution to begin with, because I understand you are just migrating a lot of your supplier database to a third party that you might not trust that much at the beginning because you have not had any experience with them. But you could start with that third party, building an internal tactical procurement team to help you manage those tail spend orders. And then in the future, that could evolve into a master vendor solution.
Tail spend outsourcing. Why is the fear out there?
It's a great question. I think we touched base on some of those points, but just to recap, I think one of the most important ones is the cultural resistance, as we mentioned before. Stakeholders not willing to give up on that feel of ownership that they have with their suppliers because they are small, they have been working with them directly for many years. Procurement has never really held them with anything related to the procurement process itself. So having now, even if it's an internal program that you decide to put in place with a third party partner, from a stakeholder perspective, they are losing the ownership of that relationship and they might continue to go outside the process, working directly with that supplier. There is a little bit of resistance from the internal procurement teams. That's why it's important that the higher levels of procurement communicate the strategy to their strategic procurement buyers or even tactical buyers. If you decide to implement a solution that will be focusing on tail spend only, your tactical team might still have to do their job regularly and nothing will change for them. So it's very important that the higher levels of the procurement department inform to their entire community, what's the expected outcome of the program, why it's being implemented, and why they should not worry about this implementation. Because then when you have all that procurement people on your side, then any pushback that you might receive either from a supplier or a stakeholder, they can quickly help you mitigate that and tell stakeholders, hey, this is the route we have to go. Once they hear that from an internal procurement person, it might be much easier for them to adopt it. Another important factor is related to data security concerns, especially talking about Fortune 500 companies. If you decide to implement a solution with a third party supplier, that means they will have access to a lot of information about what you purchase from whom, what's the price you pay, your terms and conditions, etc. So how that data is stored by your third party provider is super important. And a lot of times, I don't want to say it's a showstopper for any company, but it certainly delays the implementation process a little bit until they fully understand how all that process will work and how that data will be stored and protected. Another important factor, as Brendan mentioned, is the lack of tailored solutions. We see a lot out there in the market that providers might say, hey, this is my solution, this is how you implement it, it's super quick, but it might not fit every single company. So they say, well, we tried, it didn't really fit what we needed, they were not willing to customize anything, so we couldn't implement anything in the end. We have to be conscious that what we are offering is great as a starting point, but we might need to customize that in order to meet internal company policies from one particular customer or different needs. So I think that the more the market is offering tailored solutions, the more open companies will be to exploring the implementation of a tail spend solution. I believe those are the main concerns companies would typically face on whether or not they should decide to implement a tail spend solution. And maybe the last one would be, is it going to be worth the investment? They will typically try to calculate how much money they will spend in implementing the tail spend solution, but it's not often very clear what's going to be the return of that investment. That's why it's important questions, like there might be an operational saving component that is often overlooked. No one is really paying attention to that. And there's also the source cost savings component that is probably the most common one. And when we implement the solution, we typically try to help build that ROI analysis. So there's real information and something tangible that a procurement person can present internally to get approval. So that one is also very important. But yeah, I think those are the main ones.
Why it's so difficult to implement a tail solution for the big Fortune 500 organization?
Boy, what a great question. The experience we had is really because there are multiple decision makers. A tail spend program is not just a procurement activity. It's a finance activity. It's a legal activity. It's a stakeholder activity, right? Getting together a cross-functional team at the client side that agree to how every part of the program should work proves to be very challenging. So we as an outsource provider can implement a tail program fairly rapidly, but what tends to happen, our customers cannot. And it normally is an extended period of time for them to agree on how they want the tail program to work. And that's just how big companies move. It's not a criticism. It's just how they operate and how they do business, which indirectly says they're not really designed to manage tail organizationally, not just a procurement team that's understaffed. The other disciplines that help support them, finance, legal, even stakeholders, they're not necessarily designed to put a program in for rapid solutions, rapid service, but they also have the biggest opportunities. Big companies have the largest opportunities for every aspect, from the operational, source cost savings, reputational risk. They have a huge opportunity for their organizations to save money and manage their business well.
What are future trends in tail spend solutions?
Well, clearly the technologies, there are so many niche technologies that are being developed and have been developed over the last 5 years. There is the sheer number of applications that customers can attach to their eProc tools or buy right on their phone. Those technologies are probably have tripled in the last 5 years. So they present a great opportunity and they present a great challenge. The opportunity is streamlining the buying activity, being able to buy more cost effectively. The challenges are it will accentuate the unmanaged concerns that companies have. And those concerns are compliance, fraud, all the activities that procurement normally has the responsibilities to protect for a company. Those technologies challenge that. So where do I think it's going is I think those technologies will be successful, most of them. I think the buying behavior of the market will change dramatically. Tail will increase, and they will need complementary solutions to continue to manage it in this new AI-driven, speed-driven, automation-driven, technology-driven buying behaviors.
Hey, thank you for watching. If you liked this video, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more.